When it comes to the history of fighting games, there was nothing quite like Killer Instinct. The arcade cabinets were loud and attention grabbing, and if you were a Super Nintendo owner, the game served as the perfect breath of fresh air from Street Fighter II and Mortal Kombat, the two fighting game franchises that had previously dominated on the platform. This Rare developed classic would lean heavily on combos, pre-rendered graphics, and the arcade game, the upcoming power of the Nintendo Ultra 64. Sales were through the roof for the 16-bit version of the game, but just a few short months after the home port saw release, the even more epic Killer Instinct 2 hit arcades. I have fond memories of enjoying such a cabinet on holiday in Orlando as a child, dreaming of a day I would be able to bring it home and play it on the Super Nintendo. However, as history now shows us, incredibly, sadly, no such game was ever released. While this is the case, what if I told you that while we have never been able to buy such a port of the game, not only was such a title worked on, but rumour has it, it was completely finished too. So with all of this said, hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is the lost Killer Instinct 2 for Super Nintendo. Yeah! In 1994, the landscape of the video game industry underwent a seismic transformation. A paradigm shift was sweeping through the realm of gaming as the old guard of 2D, cartridge-based consoles was being overshadowed by the ascent of cutting-edge 3D technologies and CD-ROM-powered gaming platforms. This technological revolution was heralded by the arrival of consoles like the Sega Saturn and Sony's groundbreaking PlayStation, which collectively became the new standard bearers for the gaming world. Amidst this dynamic shift, Nintendo and Sega were still holding their ground with their tried and true 2D cartridge-based systems, despite their age and technological limitations. The Super Nintendo in particular was not merely surviving, it was experiencing something of a renaissance. This revival could be attributed in large part to the capabilities of the Super FX chip, which breathed new life into the aging console. The Super FX chip enabled the Super Nintendo to venture into the realm of rudimentary 3D graphics, as evidenced by the release of Star Fox. While it may not have matched the visual prowess of cutting-edge arcade boards produced by companies like Namco, it was an impressive feat for a console that was ostensibly approaching the twilight of its expected lifespan. With Nintendo having an eye on the future with the development of the 64-bit successor in full swing, then named the Nintendo Ultra 64, they'd need to develop titles and get third parties on board. One of the latter Super Nintendo titles that showed the power the console could have in the right hands was a rare, pun intended, time that Nintendo would let other developers play with their precious toys. This exceptional game was none other than Donkey Kong Country, a masterpiece of gaming artistry crafted by the talented team at Rare. What set Donkey Kong Country apart was its groundbreaking utilization of computer-generated graphics, which was a true revelation at the time. This extraordinary leap in graphical fidelity proved to be a godsend for the Super Nintendo. Donkey Kong Country helped keep the platform relevant, but it also sparked a triumphant trilogy of games that further showcased the console's longevity. Unlike Nintendo's later in-house creation, Yoshi's Island, which bore the aesthetics of a storybook, Donkey Kong Country's visuals resembled the groundbreaking computer-generated imagery of Toy Story, the pioneering CG-exclusive animated film of its time. This marked a pivotal moment in gaming where Rare harnessed the power of pre-rendered computer graphics to deliver a visual experience that was, in many ways, on par with the cinematic achievements of the era. Emboldened by the enthusiastic reception of their graphical innovation, in addition to their Donkey Kong game, Rare ventured into uncharted territory and set their sights on developing an arcade fighting game that would leave a significant mark on the gaming landscape. The result was Killer Instinct. While Killer Instinct may not have revolutionised the core mechanics of the fighting game genre, it introduced a series of distinctive elements that, when combined, set it apart as a truly unique offering. Unlike traditional fighters with 2 rounds, Killer Instinct introduced the concept of 2 health bars for each combatant. When one of these health bars was depleted, the fighters would briefly retreat to their respective sides of the ring to catch their breath. This dynamic added an extra layer of strategy and tension to the matches, forcing players to manage their health resources more prudently. However, what truly set Killer Instinct apart was its emphasis on combo moves. The game placed a remarkable focus on executing intricate and devastating combinations of attacks. Pair all this with an exuberant announcer who heightened the excitement by enthusiastically proclaiming the number of hits in a combo with phrases like Ultra Combo or its variants, you couldn't not pay attention to this game. Such features not only encourage players to master their characters' moves, but also intensified the competitive aspects of the game too. In the spirit of adding yet another unique twist, Killer Instinct incorporates the combo breaker mechanic, enabling players who found themselves on the receiving end of a relentless combo to break free from their opponent's assault, regaining control of the match. This quirk provided an avenue for comeback plays, further deepening the strategic aspect of the game. Lastly, Killer Instinct included the finishing move system akin to the famed fatalities in the Mortal Kombat series. These finishing moves allowed victorious players to deliver a final stylish blow to their opponents and a spectacular and memorable conclusion to each match. This classic may not have reinvented the wheel when it came to fighting game mechanics, but it successfully wove together a tapestry of innovative elements that distinguished it from its peers. Its unique approach to health management, a focus on intricate combos, the dramatic announcer, the inclusion of combo breakers, and the addition of stylish finishing moves combined to create an unforgettable gaming experience that left a lasting legacy in the annals of arcade gaming history. Strolling past the mesmerising arcade machine that housed Killer Instinct, you couldn't help but be captivated by the tantalising advertisements promising its imminent arrival on the eagerly anticipated Nintendo Ultra 64. Excitement was at its peak as gamers envisioned indulging in the adrenaline-pumping action of this title on the cutting-edge hardware. However, as fate would have it, the relentless march of time and the inevitable delays in the development of the 64 would soon rewrite such a game plan. With the Ultra 64's debut postponed, the gaming world witnessed an unexpected twist. In a surprising turn of events, the iconic Super Nintendo would become the lucky recipient of a port of Killer Instinct in the latter portion of 1995. Speaking of this version, it took little time for this captivating title to conquer the Super Nintendo, gracing the platform with a distinctive black cartridge and, depending on the edition, a coveted soundtrack CD dubbed Killer Cuts. In the field of gaming, success often paved the ways for sequels, which meant producing the Killer Instinct 2 would be no exception. In a swift and determined move, a sequel was rolled out in the arcades in January 1996. But how was this one different from the last? Well, Killer Instinct 2 retained much of the original game's signature gameplay elements, while infusing new excitement with the introduction of throws, parries and super moves. The sequel took a daring narrative leap, shifting from a futuristic setting featuring cybernetic warriors to a time travel adventure where the returning cast was propelled 2 millennia into the past. During this time frame, by the time Killer Instinct 2 was dazzling arcade goers, the Super Nintendo was clearly approaching the twilight of its illustrious reign. The spotlight now beckoned the Nintendo 64, poised to ascend to Nintendo's new cartridge champion. This left Killer Instinct 2 at a crossroads, and the details of this pivotal moment in history remain shrouded in some ambiguity. According to a contemporaneous interview documented in the annals of Rare Gamer, the wheels of development for a console version of Killer Instinct 2 began turning as soon as Nintendo delivered the much-awaited development boards to Rare. With Rare having originally planned for the sequel to be a home console exclusive, the arcade board would be of the same capabilities as the original title, and once the N64 dev kits were provided, half the team would splinter off to finally fulfill the console ambitions of the game. The burning question, long buried in the sands of time, was whether they had planned to unleash a home port of this electrifying title for both the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and the Nintendo 64, or whether the Snes version fell by the wayside once the N64 entered the scene. An interview mentions both Ultra Killer Instinct, Killer Instinct 2 and Killer Instinct 64 almost interchangeably, but remembering that the N64 was almost called the Ultra 64 if it weren't for Konami's dirty Ultra Games branding, it becomes clear that Ultra Killer Instinct could have essentially been the same as Super Killer Instinct a decade previously. After all, a title like Killer Instinct 64 certainly wouldn't be out of place amongst the Nintendo 64's library. Adding further complexity to the puzzle, enthusiasts with an eagle eye have unearthed an intriguing tidbit from the gaming archives. The cutting room floor, that treasure trove of hidden gaming secrets, reveals the existence of a title card for Thriller Instinct buried within the code. Could it be that the king of pop, the indomitable Michael Jackson, played a role in this mysterious alteration? After all, Michael Jackson had a historic affiliation with Sega, and perhaps the spectre of his involvement led to a change of heart. But personally, I feel this theory is too bad, dangerous, and off the wall to hold any merit, and we should just leave it alone.
Very good, very good. Okay then.
Returning to the realm of actual possibilities, it's plausible that the Super Nintendo iteration of Killer Instinct 2 would have relied on the foundations of its predecessor for a swift turnaround. This would entail a replacement of the stages and the omission of roughly half the cast introduced in the time-travelling adventure of the sequel. Picture this, the game effectively becoming the Killer Instinct 2 roster superimposed on the Killer Instinct 1 engine, a clever repurposing of content to breathe life into this anticipated release. In such a scenario, the Super Nintendo would have seen an evolution of the original title rather than a mere enhanced port, which would have been lovely. Instead, towards the conclusion of 1996, the Nintendo 64 witnessed the introduction of an enhanced port known as Killer Instinct Gold. Despite the notable increase in the system's processing power, this rendition was still distributed on a cartridge, leading to certain sacrifices. To accommodate the limitations of the cartridge format, some of the more substantial elements of the arcade original had to be omitted. The game had to forego full motion video and voice samples, for example, which occupied a considerable amount of storage space that could have been utilised for in-game graphics. Consequently, while Killer Instinct Gold boasted impressive visual quality, it had to reduce the scope of the gameplay compared to the arcade version, with even character frames being trimmed down to make it fit. Originally slated for a launch release with the console, the title faced delays, but it ultimately included features like practice modes, tournaments, and unlockable character skins, setting Killer Instinct Gold at home apart somewhat from Killer Instinct 2 available in the arcades. In the years that followed, Rare would not jump at developing a Killer Instinct 3, and shortly after the launch of the disc-based Nintendo GameCube, Rare would be picked up by Nintendo rival company Microsoft. Past this point, they would toss out a few attempts at reviving franchises, and then eventually boil down to becoming a Kinect developer until Sea of Thieves would give them a notable boost about a decade and a half later. Killer Instinct Gold marked the end of an era for the franchise, a swan song of sorts until Microsoft breathed new life into it in the early 2010s with a fresh entry in the series. While ports of the arcade version of Killer Instinct 2 were made available on Rare Replay, it was a particular tweet by Tim Stamper that would end up intriguing fans even more. In this now iconic tweet, he shared a snapshot of his workstation primarily showcasing the cartridge of dreams. However, sharp-eyed observers noticed a revelation in the form of several ROM chips labelled KI2 Snes, suggesting that not only was Killer Instinct 2 for the Super Nintendo worked on, but someone still possesses a copy of the game to this day. Reportedly, the title had been completed due to contractual obligations, but Nintendo decided against releasing it, fearing it might adversely affect the sales of their larger release for the Nintendo 64. This decision wasn't entirely unprecedented, as Nintendo had previously shelved the finished Star Fox 2 for the Super Nintendo in favour of the 3D-powered Star Fox 64. Perhaps someday they might consider making it available through the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack, provided Microsoft is open to discussions given their ownership of Rare and consequently the Killer Instinct brand. But for now, this mysterious game of legends remains unplayable in Tim Stamper's private collection. To this day, the absence of a Killer Instinct 2 port for the Super Nintendo remains a lamentable gap in the history of gaming. While the original Killer Instinct has garnered a devoted fan base on the system, its sequel remains an enigma. For now, even seeing Killer Instinct 2 running on the 16-bit legendary platform remains a distant hope, unless Rare or Tim Stamper decide to one day offer us a glimpse behind the curtain. Although time may have passed and gaming technology has evolved, the desire for a Super Nintendo port of Killer Instinct 2 remains a poignant reminder of the power and nostalgia that classic games hold in the heart of 90s players everywhere. So for that reason alone, this tale was worth telling. Anyway, if you enjoyed this episode, why not check out my upload on the lost Mortal Kombat Nitro for the Super Nintendo now? Yeah, cheerio.